Omar, you know, the woman at the center of this entire fraud scandal who just happens to have the district that's involved in this enormous fraud scandal, the largest actually, to quote the administration, believed to have ever transpired ever. Like, it's sort of unbelievable. I mean, she's got that going for her, talking about going down in history. Anyway, a lot of questions right now in this moment about just exactly how involved she was or wasn't. We shall find out in the coming days, I suspect. You know the story, Minnesota involved in this at least $1 billion fraud. Some estimates up to $8 billion. New York Times first to report on it. Timmy Waltz apparently looking the other way, according to the whistleblowers, which we'll get to. Meanwhile, Ilhan Omar is now speaking out for the first time. And I'm telling you, she's got to, because it's getting bad.
Well, now investigators are tracking the web of fraud to other Minnesota Democrats, such as Congresswoman Ilhan Omar. Many of the suspects linked to the scheme live in her district, including a restaurant owner who hosted events for her. He has since been convicted of stealing $12 million in COVID funds.
Investigators are finding in Minnesota is growing by the day. Several of the whistleblowers in Minnesota have also told lawmakers they believe the total amount of fraud could total up to more than $8 billion.
Yeah.
Legislation that led to the $250 million being defrauded. She held events at one of the restaurants that was named in the fraud case and had a former staffer who was convicted in the fraud investigation. That's from the New York Post. And 60 of the 79 people who've been indicted in this are from her 5th congressional district there in Minnesota. So a lot of people are saying, wow, there's a lot of potential links here. How much did
you hear the rest of that? A lot of people are saying there are a lot of potential links here. You think? Very few people actually reporting on this. I give my former employer, Fox, a lot of credit for digging in, as have I right here on the Trish Regan Show. New York Post is doing some reporting on this as well. But, you're not seeing this in the mainstream media. No. Except when, Ilhan chooses to grace CBS's news desk, if you can call it that, with her appearance. The problem is it's a softy interview. You've got Ilhan Omar going into friendly territory there with one Margaret Brennan, who seems to take her side more than anyone else we've seen. Here she is, Ilhan Omar, trying to justify this in some way, shape, or form. Don't label my district as bad just because 60 of 79, the people involved are right from my hometown, District 5. Here we go.
Of the 87 people charged, all but 8 are of Somali descent. And that has added to the spotlight being put specifically on your community. Why do you think this fraud was allowed to get so widespread?
Well, I want to say, this also has an impact on Somalis because we are also taxpayers in Minnesota. We also could have benefited from the program and the money that was stolen. And so it's been really frustrating for people to not acknowledge the fact that we're also, as Minnesotans, as taxpayers, really upset and angry about the fraud that has occurred.
Do you feel bad for her? Anyway, they're talking about this being actually $8 billion. So maybe not just $1 billion, but growing. We're going to get to that because Stephen Miller had some interesting things to say on this. The whistleblowers are saying some interesting things. And this is just beginning. Let's be really, really clear. Again, she's not taking any responsibility whatsoever. Listen.
As you know, one of the initial defenses by the organization at the heart of the fraud, Feeding Our Future, was to claim the probe was due to racism. Do you think that this was all about negligence or that it was political fear of alienating the Somali community?
So you have to remember that the woman who led the program is a Caucasian woman. And that was her way of making sure that this would continue to happen by using whatever rhetoric that was available to her.
You see, it's the white lady's fault. You got that? Just so we're clear, it's the white lady's fault.
We do know that when the money was stopped, they did sue. The AG, Attorney General Keith Ellison, defended the department in that lawsuit. It was a judge that said it should continue, that money should continue to go out. And so this wasn't something that people were not looking at. There was always those alarms, and we will continue to understand where things might have gone wrong as these investigations continue and as these fraudsters are prosecuted and sent to jail.
Ooh, that was awkward. That was difficult. That was like word salad galore. I mean, she did manage to get the blame on the white woman in there, but this is just sort of what she's been going with. That somehow the system made it too easy, right? It's not the Somali community's fault that she represents. It was the system. I mean, forget about the fact that she's the one that introduced the bill, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, that would enable feeding our future to swindle American taxpayers out of at least $1 billion. Here she is the other day on CNN when she first came up for air, and she actually had not been as heavily implicated at that point, because at that point we didn't know that a former campaign staffer that used to work for her was actually convicted of something like $3 million in fraud. We didn't know at that point that the guy who's hosting her campaign party on election night when she wins, that guy had something like $5 million in fraud. I mean, we didn't know the direct connections at this point, but already you can see she's starting to get nervous. Here we go, back to, I think this was Thursday on CNN.
Can you shed any light on why the fraud got so out of control in Minnesota?
I think what happened is that, when you have these kind of new programs that are designed to help people, you're oftentimes relying on third parties to be able to facilitate. And I just think that a lot of the COVID programs that were set up, they were set up so quickly that a lot of the guardrails did not get created.
I see. Okay, so it was all those programs, they just made it too easy. They didn't have any guardrails. Well, I'll tell you, prosecutors are not going to buy that. Treasury Secretary is not going to buy that. He's out there saying it could be even worse than you think. The Treasury Secretary of the United States of America, one Scott Bessent, went on that same little program that Ilhan was just on, and he went on before her to say that we're investigating not just the fraud, but we're investigating any of the money that went overseas, because, there's this thing called wire services, these little wire companies that you can wire money abroad for, and we've got money going to Turkey, China, Somalia, of course, Kenya, Dubai. And what are they worried about? They're worried about terrorist financing, right? Fundraising. That's what they're concerned about. And so that's now coming into the purview of Treasury. It's coming into the purview of the IRS. I'll tell you, this is getting worse and worse and worse for one Ilhan Omar and the rest of her buddies there, who we don't know. I'm not saying that they knew, although I find it kind of hard to think that she could have been hanging out with all these people, introducing the legislation that would enable them to help themselves so easily and not have known anything. That's kind of amazing. I don't think I'm that naive, but we'll give her the benefit of the doubt until we see what else is there. But I'm telling you, we're going to do some digging here, a lot of digging, which Treasury Secretary Bessent has begun. And look at the hostility that he's met with here on CBS. I'll tell you, he's turning into some kind of assassin. Bessent, for the win on this one. Watch him take down this CBS reporter. Check it out.
The president told you, though, this week to look into Somalis who, quote, ripped off that state for billions of dollars. He said they contribute nothing. What exactly are you investigating?
Well, Margaret, to be clear, the initial fraud that was discovered by the IRS, for which I'm the acting commissioner, is discovered by IRS Criminal Investigations Unit. This was not an endogenous thing that the state of Minnesota decided we had to go in and clean up the mess for them, and this is part of the continued cleanup. A lot of money has been transferred from the individuals who committed this fraud, including those who donated to the governor, donated to Representative Omar, and donated to A.G. Ellison. But they've been transferred to something called MBSs. And those are...
Mortgage-backed security? What do you mean?
They're like
sorry?
wire transfer.
Transferred to what?
These are money, the Bureau services, and they are wire transfer organizations that are outside the regulated banking system. And that money has gone overseas And we are tracking that both to the Middle East and to Somalia to see what the uses of that have been.
Okay, but you have no evidence of that money being used to fuel terrorism at this point, which is what some conservative writers are.
It's been a week, Margaret, okay? His point is we're investigating it. They had all this money going overseas. That they do know about. So now the question is whether or not any of it was linked to terror. By the way, what's it doing going overseas if it's supposed to feed our kids, for goodness sakes? Oh, boy, this is bad.
That's why it's an investigation. We started it last week. We'll see where it goes. But I can tell you that, it's terrible. Representative Omar tried to downplay it, said, it was very, it was very tough to know how this money should be used.
Yeah.
She was gaslighting the American people.
Well, we'll talk to her.
Yeah, but when you come to this country, you got to learn which side of the road to drive on. You got to learn to stop at stop signs, and you got to learn not to defraud the American people.
Whoa! Like I said, Besant for the win. My gosh, did you see the reporter? She started clicking her papers and everything. She's like trying to move it along, because she doesn't like what he's saying. She really did not like what he was saying at all. Basically, what he said was there was money going overseas. It's these wire transfer company, something like a Western Union, not to pick on them, but like that's the kind of company, right, that you would use to transfer money. Well, that comes under the jurisdiction of the Treasury Department as well as the IRS. And so what are they going to do? They're going to look at all of that money that went, and we could be talking about billions of dollars that went overseas instead of feeding our future, feeding our kids. Wow. Wow. Well, Ilhan Omar is off her rocker. And by the way, so is the reporter, because they seem to have forgotten this little thing that happened along the way, which was that a campaign staffer, I want you to remember this before we watch the soundbite, okay? This guy, Guhad Hashi Saeed, he and Omar together, you see the picture of them, back in happier days, you see, because Mr. Saeed was convicted of having taken something like $3 million from this. Remember that. Because what did Besant just say? Well, we have evidence that some people involved in her campaigns, a staffer, actually was misusing these funds. And it's like that never even happened as far as Ilhan and the reporter are concerned. Watch.
I want to pick up on where the Treasury Secretary just left off. He alleged that people who were tied to you or your campaign were involved in this broad, brazen scheme to rip off the Minnesota state welfare system. Do you want to respond to that? Do you know what he is referring to?
I really don't, and I don't think the secretary himself understands what he's referring to. We obviously...
Excuse me. Let's go back and play that again. We know that Mr. Saeed has been convicted of having stolen millions of dollars. So let's play again. Apparently the reporter forgot that, or she missed that news flash, which came out on Friday.
I want to pick up on where the Treasury Secretary just left off. He alleged that people who were tied to you or your campaign were involved in this broad, brazen scheme to rip off the Minnesota state welfare system. Do you want to respond to that? Do you know what he is referring to?
I really don't, and I don't think the secretary himself understands what he's referring to. We obviously had people who were able to donate to our campaign that were involved. We sent that money back a couple years ago. And actually, I was one of the first members of Congress to send a letter to the Secretary of Ag asking them to look into what I thought was a reprehensible fraud that was occurring within the program.
Your time was up, right, lady? Okay, so Ilhan Omar staffer pleads guilty in fraud case. Apparently, CBS didn't realize that. That was actually 2 months ago that he pled guilty. This is, as I said, his picture there. She's been implicated with a lot of people. A lot of these fraudsters like to take selfies with her. Again, one of the fraudsters and she were together on election night because when she won, where did she choose to have her party? At his restaurant.
All right, this news just breaking moments ago. Fox News has obtained photos of one of the Somali illegal immigrants wrapped up in the Minnesota fraud scandal, posing with several high-profile Minnesota Democrats, including Congresswoman Ilhan Omar and Governor Tim Walz. The man pictured is Abdul Dahir Ibrahim. He entered the country in 2000 and has had an order for removal since 2004. He also has a prior conviction in Canada for asylum and welfare fraud. ICE tells Fox News Ibrahim was granted temporary protected status for 10 years, but should have never been eligible.
No, definitely not. Here's the bill that she introduced. I want you to take a good look at this one, guys. It was HR 6187, and guess whose name is very much at the top of it? This is to allow the Secretary of Agriculture to grant certain waivers under the Russell National School Lunch Act to address school closures due to COVID-19. So this is the thing that basically gave them the funding in order to have Feeding Our Future, which then turned into a billion-dollar, multi-billion-dollar estimates of up to $8 billion, could be even higher, scheme to basically defraud U.S. taxpayers, the largest perhaps in history. Ilhan Omar really, I think having to deal with some consequences in the here and now. One would hope that the investigation goes right straight back to her, because how much money was she getting from all of these people in terms of campaign donations? Right now, it's somewhere in the like $7,000 range, so not that significant. But was there something else going on? I mean, it's kind of interesting. The woman's net worth has skyrocketed from like 200 grand to 30 million in the last year or so. I guess that's because the hubby has his little political consulting business, of which, by the way, he consults for her. So her campaign pays him. I mean, just once again, another one of the many sort of sketchy things about this woman. Let's go to the Fox report on it here.
Tracking the web of fraud to other Minnesota Democrats, such as Congresswoman Ilhan Omar. Many of the suspects linked to the scheme live in her district, including a restaurant owner who hosted events for her. He has since been convicted of stealing $12 million in COVID funds.
Yeah, okay, so $12 million would be a lot, right? And it's like when she was on there with Margaret Brennan on CBS, and the Treasury Secretary just mentioned this. It's like both she and Margaret chose to have amnesia about everything. I guess this is the picture of another one of the guys. I mean, it's just unbelievable. I mean, multi arrests. 79 people have been implicated in this. 60 of them were from her district. Meanwhile, you know, you've got her telling falsehoods, if you ask me, trying to pretend like the guy didn't work for her own campaign. But should we be surprised? I mean, heck, she thinks we're all stupid. We're all just stupid. You know what, Americans? She told us as much.
These people are just idiots. I really, you know, I'm at the point where it's become really hard to have an intellectual debate with any of these people, because the level of stupidity that they are displaying every single day is frankly embarrassing, not just in Congress, but as Americans. And the fact that these people are allowed to say just the most ridiculous things tells you that the dumbing of the United States has arrived, because how else do we get a Trump presidency again?
Oh my gosh. Okay. So guys, who's stupid now? Okay. Like she's obviously pretty stupid for hooking up with the wrong kind of people. 60 out of 79 fraudsters, all from her district, which leads us to a whole slew of other questions. Meanwhile, you gotta say this about Timmy. He's out there pretending like this is no big deal. He's, by the way, running. He's supposed to be running for governor, right? So he's in the middle of an election. He should be talking about this enough. We can't find any sound from him. The guy went into hiding over the weekend, apparently, because he knows. He knows things are looking really, really bad. The New York Times, obviously, being the first to really come out with this, they really haven't done enough reporting, if you ask me, on this sense. But I'll just say this. I don't know how he gets elected governor of Minnesota again, because if you live in Minnesota, you should be pretty angry with what has gone down. And you know what? According to one state representative in Minnesota, she's saying the whistleblowers went to Timmy's team and they were told to knock it off. So in other words, the allegation here is that Timmy and his chief of staff just chose to look the other way. Why? Because apparently the Somalian community is that important to Minnesota. Watch.
Who are saying that the governor knew, and the governor and Lieutenant Governor and even Chris Schmitter, who was his chief of staff, came to them as staff and scolded them for pointing out fraud.
Oh boy. So that's a pretty big development. You've got whistleblowers that say, we told Timmy, we told his team, and nothing happened. And then at some point it gets referred up to the feds because nobody can do a damn thing in the state of Minnesota there to challenge any of this. Timmy says, not my fault, not my fault. Tampon Timmy, AKA.
Governor Tim Walz, who is up for re-election, is under fire for all of this happening under his watch. But he says they have paused these programs. They've brought in outside auditors to get an idea of how far-reaching this fraud was. They're taking steps to keep it from happening again. And he's defending his management of the state while also taking shots at Republicans and the president.
Oh, yeah. Because why not take a shot at the Republicans and the president? Somehow this is all the Republicans' fault. I mean, at least $1 billion, possibly $8 billion goes missing, and it's somehow Donald Trump's fault. You get how this works, right? You get how this works. I mean, sorry, you guys have no excuse on this one. And Timmy's delusional to sit there and say stuff like this.
And in spite of the headwinds we're up against, Minnesota ranks economically, economic growth, happiness, number of people insured, education levels, near the very top. So I'll tell you what, I have no interest in having this state look like Oklahoma or Mississippi.
Please.
And if folks are going to commit crimes here, thinking because our generous spirit and our programs that we have is going to give them some kind of cover, they are sadly mistaken.
Yeah, Minnesota is also now home to the single largest pandemic fraud scheme in the country. And Republicans argue that Walz and other Democrats opened the door to this.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to say, by the way, don't pick on Mississippi and Oklahoma because they're looking darn pristine compared to you and your state of Minnesota. This is nothing against the good people in Minnesota, but clearly you get some problems there, and you get some problems that nobody was even willing to address, not willing to address in any way, shape, or form. I mean, Donald Trump would tell you there's a reason for that. Stephen Miller would tell you there's a reason for that. As you heard Besson say, you come to this country and you kind of got to get with the program. We have certain rules, and it doesn't mean it's a free-for-all. And you can't just, help yourself because you think that's the way it goes. No. So Stephen Miller talking about this issue on Hannity's program the other night, and Ilhan Omar did not appreciate his rhetoric. She had a response, which frankly just sounds like a total meltdown. But anyway, we'll start with Miller. I want you to hear what he said. And, he's just calling it like it is. I mean, you can't do this stuff, right? Like you can't.
We have found so far, we believe that the Somali fraud operation in Minnesota is the single greatest theft of taxpayer dollars through welfare fraud in American history. We believe that we have only scratched the very top of the surface of how deep this goes. And you're familiar with all the scams with pretending that children have autism who are not in fact autistic, with pretending to enroll people in food programs when in fact nobody was ever enrolled, and engaging in massive fraud, lying, and theft and grift on a scale we've never seen before in American history. The total bill, the total tab for this is going to be far beyond the numbers we've already seen reported. We believe the state government is fully complicit in this scheme, and we believe that what we are going to uncover is going to shock the American people. Look, based on the records that we already have, and this is a significant undercount, by the way, 75% of the Somali population in Minnesota is on welfare. But that's likely a significant undercount of just how much of a financial burden the Somali refugee population is imposing on this country.
Wow. Okay, so she didn't like that very much. And of course, she went back to the well. And when I say the well, I'm talking World War II, okay? That's the well that they always go back to because you got to call them this, that, and the other. And she went there. And I want you to hear her response because, by the way, Margaret Brennan, the reporter that's interviewing her, like I said, it's friendly territory, warm and fuzzy. By the way, maybe you don't want to be that friendly right now because Paramount would really, Paramount is the parent company, remember, of CBS, would really like to do this deal with Warner Brothers Discovery. and probably wants some help, just saying, from the administration to say that, Netflix and Warner Brothers Discovery might actually be a monopoly of sorts. I'm just saying, like, you probably don't want to get on the bad side of this administration. That's neither here nor there. And, unfortunately, that's something they do have to worry about. Not something I have to worry about. That's the beauty of being an independent creator. Make sure you subscribe, share, like, all that good stuff. But anyway, Ilhan Omar responding to one Stephen Miller with this.
I want to ask you about something else that the architect of the president's immigration policy, Stephen Miller, said. On Thanksgiving Day, he posted, "No magic transformation occurs when failed states cross borders. At scale, migrants and their descendants recreate the conditions and terrors of their broken homelands." What do you make of this argument of failure to assimilate and sort of ruining America? How do you understand this?
I mean, when I think about Stephen Miller and
I'm surprised she's not going back to Americans are stupid, right?
And his white supremacist rhetoric, it reminds me of the way the Nazis described Jewish people in Germany. And, as we know, there have been many immigrants who've tried to come to the United States who've turned back, one of them being Jewish immigrants. We know the way that people were described who were coming from Ireland, Irish immigrants. We know the way in which people were described back then.
She's doing that for Brennan's sake, or Regan's, or any Irish person out there. I don't know. Last I checked, most immigrants that used to come to America back in the day actually wanted to be more American than anything else. You get communities now that are perfectly happy to continue with their cultures and their way of living and not even bothering to learn the English language, etc. I mean, we could go off all day on this. You need a constitutional amendment saying English is the first and only language of the United States of America. Do we not? What do you guys think? I'm curious on your view on that one. And I'm saying this as somebody who speaks a zillion languages, by the way. Spanish, Italian. I was actually pretty decent at German at one time. Anyway, we go on.
When they were Italian immigrants. And to me, we're, yes, of course, ethnically Somali. We are in this country as Americans.
Yeah.
We are citizens. We are productive part of this nation, and we will continue to be.
Congresswoman Omar, thank you for your time today.
I'm surprised she didn't kneel down. I mean, it was very, very hard to watch that whole interview. Clearly, the bias is there. And by the way, she's a very nice person in real life. I used to share an office cube area with her at CNBC. She really is a delightful person, so nothing against her, but the bias is so entrenched. She actually, I think, was an Arabic scholar in school, so she's fluent in Arabic, and she has, in my estimation, I mean, I don't know how else you account for that interview, where she's looking at Besant like he's got three heads, and how dare you say this, how dare you say that, and then trying to allege that he was off his rocker when he said that somebody on Ilhan Omar's staff had been implicated in this. And I'm like, no. He's right. He's right. You're wrong. And Ilhan's wrong. And if you actually could get outside your own little bias tunnel, you would realize that, and you might actually have a decent interview, and we might have gotten some more interesting viewpoints out of that. All we heard was Ilhan Omar talking her book and sounding as dumb as ever. But you know what? She's the one who thinks we're the dummies. And maybe we are, because we allowed for her district to steal billions and billions of dollars. The estimates keep going higher. They're finding millions of dollars apparently every day. Well, Trump is mad about it. You heard him the other day. She's not too pleased about this one either. Donald Trump being very politically incorrect. But clearly, under the circumstances, he's not too happy with the 5th District of Minnesota run by Ilhan Omar.
The welfare is like 88%. They contribute nothing. I don't want them in our country, I'll be honest with you, okay? Somebody would say, oh, that's not politically correct. I don't care. I don't want them in our country. Their country's no good for a reason. Their country stinks, and we don't want them in our country. I could say that about other countries, too. I can say it about other countries, too. We don't want them to hell. We have to rebuild our country. Our country's at a tipping point. We could go bad. We're at a tipping point. I don't know if people mind me saying that, but I'm saying it. We could go one way or the other. And we're going to go the wrong way if we keep taking in garbage into our country.
And he went on to say,
Omar is garbage.
Ilhan Omar is garbage. Her friends are garbage. He does not want them here. I mean, it was a pretty explosive thing to say. I get it. But I think he's pretty much ready to explode over news that we are looking at the largest fraud in U.S. history of the welfare system. And it's because apparently they're just too nice in Minnesota. And so as Ilhan said earlier, you know what? It's their fault. They made it too easy, right?
The fraud got so out of control in Minnesota?
I think what happened is that, when you have these kind of new programs that are designed to help people, you're oftentimes relying on third parties to be able to facilitate. And I just think that a lot of the COVID programs that were set up, they were set up so quickly that a lot of the guardrails did not get created.
Yeah. So it's those stupid Americans' fault for putting together programs that just made it too irresistible to swipe billions away. I'll tell you, Dr. Oz is not happy either. So he came out and, he's running Medicare and Medicaid, and he's saying, listen, this is because of politics. You had Timmy Walz, who was too darn afraid of the Somali community. He couldn't do squat for a reason. He didn't listen to whistleblowers for a reason. I want you to hear Dr. Oz on it.
It's true. A Somali fraud ring in Minnesota stole over $1 billion from Medicaid. How did this happen? Well, Medicaid programs are run by the states, which in Minnesota means the Tim Walz administration. Governor Walz and the state's other Democrats rely on Somali votes to get elected, so they decided to look the other way because they were afraid of, quote-unquote, political backlash. Don't take my word for it. That's what a Somali-American fraud investigator told the New York Times. When these scammers realized that nobody was guarding the cash register, they went gangbusters. One program designed to provide housing stabilization assistance to patients ballooned to $104 million, when 4 years ago it was projected to cost only $2.6 million. Some of these taxpayer funds may have even ended up in the hands of a Somalian terrorist group. Scary stuff. When CMS became aware of the housing program situation, Minnesota insisted it could clean up its own mess. A few months ago, it admitted it could not. So we stepped in to shut down the fraud-infested housing initiative. Today, we're taking action on more than a dozen other programs, which I've outlined in the post below. Our message to Walz is clear. Either fix this in 60 days or start looking under your couch for spare change, because we are done footing the bill for your incompetence.
Wow, that was actually pretty good. He did a very good job explaining that. I think it's important for people to hear that, right? It's kind of a complicated topic, but I think bottom line, what we know went down is that you have some people that felt like they could just help themselves, and it's not okay. It's never, ever okay. So if he is suggesting that basically the politics of the moment is what created this scenario, I think that all of a sudden this Timmy Walz video from about a year ago or so totally makes sense. Because do you remember when Timmy was like, oh, we got to change our flag? And they changed it from the lovely flag that it had been into a flag that actually looks a whole lot like Somalia's flag. I've got the video. I want to play it for you. Take a look. Yeah, so he gets up and he's like, oh, okay, I need my new flag, everybody. Wow. Okay, so this is the new flag, which I'm not kidding. Like the Somalian flag has a star like that, very similar coloring to that.
There, that's better.
Yeah, that's better. That's better, all right. I find it very interesting. It's sort of like, okay, well, now it all makes sense, right? Now it all makes sense when we consider, like, they didn't need to change their flag. Why did they decide to change their flag? And why do they have to kind of model it after something out of Somalia? I think that's rather bizarre, don't you? Right? I mean, but except that now, under the circumstances, now that we're learning all of these things, yeah, now it starts to make sense. Here we go. Here's Minnesota's flag, okay? And then I've got Somalia's flag. I mean, kind of similar, kind of weird. Just saying. Think about it. All right, so you got a disaster there. And I think that the good news is This administration, this team is determined to get to the bottom of it. And I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to tell you over and over again, do not underestimate Scott Bessent. He is a brilliant guy. This is the guy that took down the Bank of England. Do not underestimate that man. And now he's in charge of looking into all the money that was sent abroad. And the concern is exactly what we all fear, that the money, our taxpayer dollars, were being used against us. It doesn't even, by the way, it's bad, right, that it's going overseas, but the idea that it could be going to fund actual terror groups against the U.S., that's a whole other can of worms, and one that has to be investigated and must be looked into, and the Treasury Department is doing so. Wow. You know, I wish they'd also look into this, because Letitia James, she's maybe getting away with something here that she shouldn't be getting away with. Or I should say one of the banks is getting away with something, because Letitia James could try and put a stop to it, but that would require her to step out and do something. I would also point to the New York Fed and say, what are you guys doing as well? But Elise Stefanik released this letter a couple of months ago, and we kind of haven't been going anywhere on it. She actually sent a letter requesting that the AG, Pam Bondi, investigate Standard Chartered Bank's illicit payments and New York Attorney General Tish James's inaction. According to one Stefanik, she said, as you know, Standard Chartered Bank makes at least $9.6 billion in illicit payments to known terrorists. So this is the story that I first reported on over the summer and was telling you about on Friday as well, in light of what we've learned about Timmy and the 5th District of Minnesota. So the other concern, and by the way, you get Tish James, who kind of seemingly, at least temporarily, is off the hook with that second indictment. I think this is actually the bigger story that they ought to be looking into. And so it would be very good if Pam Bondi would look into this, given that Stefanik has already requested she do so. Standard Chartered Bank is a British bank, and the allegation is that it had made at least $9.6 billion in illicit payments to known terrorists. This is according to a whistleblower that came forward. China has been using Standard Chartered Bank, she wrote, to purchase sanctioned Iranian oil. And they're doing it through the U.S. The payments are going all through the U.S. and through New York. They were hidden from required disclosures under the current deferred prosecution agreement being supervised by the Southern District of New York and the Attorney General for Washington, D.C., she writes. And so she's requesting that somebody do something about it. Public reports indicate that in 2024, New York's Attorney General Letitia James, she writes, and her top lieutenants were briefed by terrorist financing experts and whistleblowers about these payments. The New York Attorney General chose not to do anything about this. Her failure to act raises many concerning questions, including what else she knew about these illicit payments and what she was coordinating with the Biden administration to ignore these payments. Now, that's some pretty hefty stuff, right, that she's alleging, and we want to be cautious only because there are other people that could have been and should have been involved, including maybe New York Fed, regulators, etc. But bottom line, in her view, it's coming down to one Letitia James. And so she's saying Letitia really dropped the ball. And I would go, I would double down on that, because as AG, if you have whistleblowers coming to you and saying, hey, this company may be laundering money for the Iranians from China through New York to Iran, that can't happen. That's a very, very bad thing. And she should have done something about it. According to the public reports, including one in Gateway Pundit, in early 2024, the New York Attorney General was briefed, but did nothing other than reapprove Standard Chartered Bank's annual license. And then she was briefed apparently in 2 meetings in both February and March of 2024 about the $9.6 billion of illegal payments, and again, chose to do nothing. Why would she not do anything? Like, why would she not? And can she not respond to this? Like, if I were Pam Bondi, I would be looking into this, because this actually smacks of some really alarming, disturbing stuff. And I'm not suggesting she's guilty or that there were kickbacks. It may have just been she was completely obsessed with one thing and one thing only, and that was Donald Trump, and couldn't focus on anything. I mean, certainly not anything as boring as money laundering that might be going from China to Iran. I mean, that's not her cup of tea, not when she can be going after Trump Tower. Right? So this was not, my hunch is, and I'm being fair and I'm being nice, my hunch is she was completely negligent and didn't feel like doing her job. And apparently nobody else felt like doing their job either, because there was a history of problems with this company. So if there are allegations from whistleblowers that they're basically funneling another $9.6 billion through the U.S. to get to Iran, you don't think that you ought to be looking into that? maybe just a little. In 2019, the company was fined $1.1 billion by U.S. regulators along with UK authorities because they were caught money laundering and, what do you know, breaching sanctions. There were sanctions in place for Iran. So they're being accused of doing this all over again. And Letitia looks the other way, including transactions involving Iran. 2012, SBC paid $340 million to settle claims of laundering $250 billion for Iranian clients. Whoa! I mean, this is concerning, like really concerning. Here's the article that was in the FT where the whistleblowers were coming out and they were saying, okay, there's a lot of money there. There's this, so why is nobody doing anything about it? And again, maybe Letitia could say, well, this isn't fully my responsibility. This should be on the Federal Reserve folks in New York. This should be on so-and-so or so-and-so regulators. But if you've had it brought to your attention, don't you have some responsibility? And again, according to that report, it was brought to her attention twice in 2024. And she didn't do a darn thing. So I find this very troubling, and I think that Pam Bondi should take Elise Stefanik's advice and look into it, because this woman, well, she had one preoccupation only.
To order Donald Trump to pay $355 million for a decade of fraud. New York Attorney General Letitia James says she's prepared to do everything she can to make sure the former president pays his fine, including, she told us, seizing the buildings that bear his name.
If he does not have funds to pay off the judgment, then we will seek, judgment enforcement mechanisms in court.
Of course you will. Of course. You just couldn't wait to start doing that. So I think the big question that you got to look into at this point is whether or not this woman chose to deliberately ignore some of the things that were kind of important, right? If you have this brought to your attention, why wouldn't you be looking into it? I know she had other things to do, okay? But, once again, I think that brings us back to she was not minding the store because she had all these other distractions. She sued Donald Trump 100 times, was quite proud of saying that. And now she's suing him 100 more, right? That's all she's focused on. Well, what about actually New York? What about crime? What about, heck, you look at how in Minnesota, we saw an interview. I'll show you this tomorrow with the mayor saying that they're not going to cooperate with ICE on anything. This is bedlam, okay? This is bedlam. A quick shout out to one of our great sponsors here on the show. They help me to bring you this show free every single day, and they have wonderful stuff. I've actually really, really, really gotten into my supplements recently, I got to tell you. I always knew they were pretty good, but lately, they're very valuable to me in that I don't want to bore you with, but I'm getting older and aches and joints and pain. All of a sudden I really realized it's critical, really critical to take the vitamins and make sure you're getting your vitamins. So balance in nature is a big part of that for me. You get, I think it's, am I doing my math right? Yeah, 31, 15 and 16. It's 15 veggies or fruits. One or the other. Sometimes I get them confused. And then 15 or 16 veggies or fruits. So 31 total together, where you get all these nutrients and they freeze dry it and then they pack it up and you get it packed into a supplement. And it's a great way to make sure that you're getting a diverse number of vitamins every single day. So I think it's really wonderful. And I want to remind you that you can get 35% off. Let me put this on here. You can get 35% off by using my code word Trish. You get free shipping. You have free shipping and money back guarantee. So there we go. 35% off. Code word Trish. Maybe something for your loved one. It helps the show. It helps me, and it helps, most importantly, you. So it's well worth thinking about right now. I will say, guys, there's just a lot going on right now. I have so much more I wanted to talk to you about. Kiss getting the big award, right, at the Kennedy Center and in the Oval Office. That was phenomenal. You have Kelsey Grammer coming out and saying, remember Fraser, this is the best president ever. We're going to run that on the shorts feed tonight. There's a lot of good stuff to talk about. Alina Habba says she's not done. She has to step down from her position there as the U.S. attorney, the temporary U.S. attorney in New Jersey, because they're not allowing for her to stay. However, she's still going to be working at the DOJ and she's still on the case. We got to get back to the craziness craziness still that unfolded when New Jersey, Lena Haba went pretty hard after LaMonica, right? I got to get to say that again, LaMonica MacGyver, because that indictment still stands, and we've got to go back and look at that more closely. There's a lot happening. So I can just tell you right here on the Trish Regan Show, it is going to be a very, very, very big week. I am glad you like the Christmas tree. I've seen some of you in the comments mention the Christmas tree. You got to get in the Christmas spirit, right? Merry Christmas, everyone. We're going to be saying Merry Christmas all December, right? And I may even leave that tree up a little bit. The kids get after me because, by President's Day weekend, they're like, Mom, we're going to take down the Christmas decorations. I'm like, do we? Like, it'd be just great to have them all year long. I love them. What can I say? Thank you so much for being here. Make sure you subscribe, and I will see you back here live on the Trish Regan Show tomorrow.